Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iturrate, and the MMA detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy. Welcome back, fans, to the Lights Out podcast. I appreciate you guys being here. Chris LytesOut Lytle here, Mike and Miguel as usual. Special treat right now. This is our first time having someone who was there. UFC 1, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very happy to have this guest, Jason DeLucia. Jason, I haven't seen you in years. How the hell you been, buddy?
Very good. I love you. I miss you.
Yeah. So where are you staying at right now? Where you living?
I'm in Massachusetts.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. So, well, man, I mean, we have so many cool things. It's hard to find somebody who was there way before me, but you're definitely one of them. So, I mean, unbelievable. I want to hear all about this. Mike, man, take it off, and let's start from the beginning.
All right. So we mentioned UFC 1, but in my research, Jason, your journey to literally fight everybody started before 1993. Yeah. So would you mind telling us, growing up, what art you took, and maybe some of your experiences of fighting in some of the local dojos, because that definitely happened.
So I grew up in a town on the border of Rhode Island, and the only traditional school that we had was a Taekwondo school. So I started in that school, and that school, over some time, it had been there forever, and it closed. And some of the members of the school opened up a school called Combined Martial Arts in Bellingham. And in an interview in UFC 1, UFC sent a reporter to ask me some questions. And in the interview, he asked me about my lineage. So I told him about CMA. That's what we call it, CMA. He says, well, tell me about it. I says, it's a mixed martial arts school. He said, mixed martial arts? I'd like to use that. I said, feel free. And I even asked Art Davey if he had transcripts of it. And he said, you may be responsible for it. And that's kind of one of those Forrest Gump moments in my life. Yeah. But
so one of the rumors was that you would show up at local dojos with money in hand and you would challenge people to fights.
We did. My teacher, so I had my Taekwondo lot were all traditionalists, but then when they opened up CMA, I had a Kung Fu teacher who used to take me around to different dojos. And at the time I was young, I was 12, 13. When I was 13, I had knocked out a number of guys who were 20-year-old kickboxers because they would never expect that I could do it. And I could do it. I did it. So we used to do dojo challenges all the time. At the time, there was a chain of schools called Fred Villari's, and we used to call it black belt and a hamburger to go. So we kind of didn't like it. So if we saw Fred Villari's, he would send me in, and I would walk in and just, wreak havoc, because that's what we did. But around here, kind of a big fish in a small pond. I hadn't seen anything like the competitors that you see in UFC. I had never seen anything like that till UFC. My teachers were all that crazy, but I was just a kid, basically doing what everybody was doing. Around 1991, 92, Steven Seagal had released a challenge. It was in response to some of the actors in Hollywood and Chuck Norris and those guys. And he said, if anybody wants to challenge me, come to my dojo and be prepared to fight to the death. And I thought, oh yeah. So a friend of mine who wanted to get into music agreed to go with me to Hollywood. So we went to Hollywood. We drove in 3 straight days. We drove to Hollywood. And that has a funny story in itself. I could go back. But I took the magazine with me. I went to his dojo the very second day. We got there. We found a place really quick. And I went to his dojo. And Matsuka Harawa, who was the guy who he beats up in his movies, he was running the dojo. And I went in and I showed him the thing. And I had a written formal challenge. I said, he made this challenge. I said, I accept. And he told me straight up, he says, I don't think he's going to answer it. I said, fine. So I went every day, morning and night classes, every day that they were open. And I sat and I waited for 6 straight months until they moved, actually. They had moved. And this was through the riots. So they had finally moved to Santa Monica. The dojo closed. And I actually, my friend had a bike, a motorcycle, so we actually drove to Santa Monica just a couple of times, and then I gave up on it. In the interim,
Wait,
I needed.
Did you move to California to meet this challenge specifically?
Specifically, for that only.
Did you work when you were out there? Did you just get an apartment? How does it?
So that was a funny story. While I was wanting to go out there, I wanted to make movies. I wanted to make karate movies. So I had a friend out here, an old school thug, and I said, "You know anybody in the entertainment business?" And he says, "Yeah, I got a friend out there. He's from Woonsocket, actually." And he says his name is Charles Bouvier. He says he's acting in Hollywood. You see him on TV all the time. He says when you get out there, look him up in the Screen Actors Guild. Tell him I sent you, and he can hook you up. We drove 3 days straight across country. The first place we found was on Hollywood Boulevard. We gave them 6 months in traveler's checks down because they wanted to do a credit check. And we're like, we're tired. We need a room. So we flashed 6 months in rent. And he goes, okay, you're in. So we moved in. First place we found. First day, I went and I did the challenge at Seagal's. And after that, I walked to the Screen Actors Guild. And I asked them, I says, I want to look up this guy. And they said, do you have an agent? I said, no, I don't have an agent. I says, I want to talk to this guy. And they said, we can't give you that information without an agent. And I said, all right. So that was flustering. About 3 months in, I'm going to get the mail, and I'm looking at the roster in my building. C. Bouvier. I go up and I knock on the, we had moved into the building of the guy that I was supposed to be looking for, who was an actor in Hollywood. Wow. That was just one of those weird, that's a Forrest Gump moment. I have a ton of but yeah, so in the interim, while I was waiting for this Steven Seagal character to show up, a friend of mine who was a student at the school, CMA, he told me about the Gracies. He said, there's these guys out there, and they will meet a money challenge in their dojo. So I looked them up, and I called, and I talked to Horian, and he told me about it. And he says, we could do it any number of ways. I said, I'd like to bet. And at the time, I was running out of money, so I needed money. He says,
so Jason, is this like 91, 92?
This is 92.
So this is pre-UFC 1.
Yep. This is right after the riots. I forget exactly what time it was, but it was after the riots. And he says, what do you want to bet? I says, I'll bet $600. He goes, all right. So we had a few weeks before the fight, and I was training hard. And the day before we were supposed to go, he calls me up. He says, hey, I was thinking. He goes, I don't want to bet. He says, I don't want to do this for money. He says, we'll just do the fight and see what happens. So I said, all right. So I'm thinking in my head, oh, they're scared. They don't want to lose money. I don't know who these guys are from Adam. So we go, and I have the fight, and I get my ass kicked. And then after the fight, he goes, don't feel so bad. He goes, you made $600. And I looked at him and I went, yeah, why did you cancel? He goes, $500 is a bet. $1,000 is a bet. $600 is rent. And I just looked at him like, wow, yeah, good man. Yep.
So that was your first interaction with the Gracies, the Gracie Challenge. You took it one time. Do you remember who your first opponent was?
That was Royce. I fought him in the dojo.
So Royce was your first opponent?
Yeah, that fight's on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. Did you take it twice?
No. After that, they asked me, "Do you want to try it again?" Because he said, "Do you think you could have done anything different?" And I said, "You want me to say what I would have tried different?" He says, "No, you just fight again." I said, "No." I says, "You got my number. You kicked my ass." So, but over time, I wanted a rematch. I thought about it. I wanted a rematch. And when I would call for the rematch, he said, instead of a rematch, he says, we got this thing going on in Denver. He says, you could come to it, and if you compete your way up the ranks, he says, you'll get a chance to do that rematch again. And, I half believed it, because in this country, that type of thing hasn't happened since the days of John L. Sullivan kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I says, yeah, all right. I says, I'll do it. And that's how it started.
So you got your initial invite to UFC 1 through Horian then?
Yep.
Wow.
That makes sense, because the Gracies in the early 90s, before the UFC started their media campaign, including the Gracie Challenge and stuff, and he answered the Gracie Challenge before that. And then all of a sudden, Art Davie comes in, talks to Horian, sets up the deal for UFC. They're not going to let Art Davie bring in all the fighters. They were obviously, we know gave you Brazilian refs and stuff, and obviously they were putting some people in it. I mean, Jason was an honest guy. 92 in terms of honest in terms of in the ring action. You know, in 92, another year of training is probably a little better. It's a good move on Horian's part.
Yeah. So Jason, I went to some of the like Massachusetts traditional martial art message boards. Some of them are still up. They've been maintained. Well, I should say they're still up. They're not really active anymore. But there are several posts on there talking about you being an absolute menace to the area, about chasing down and fighting people that are presumed black belts, and you would go in with money bets. How often did you do that?
That was the type of thing that happened when I was much younger.
Right.
After fighting, it never happened. But when I was younger, I had a teacher who, God rest his soul, he encouraged all kinds of mayhem. And so, you know, the things that we would do and the things he would make me believe I could do. There was only one time in my life that there was, because I loved that he would let me fight an adult. He would show me that if you do this fight the right way, you can beat this guy. So in his version of Kung Fu, we did a lot of ground fighting, but not as extensive. Judo based, but not as extensive. So we would go into traditional karate schools where they didn't do any takedowns, any ground fighting. And that was a lot of what we would do with people. There was one guy that was, and I remember I was 14, almost 15, and I said, I want to fight that guy. And he said, no. I go, why? He goes, because he'll hit you once and you will die. I said, all right. That's the first time he'd ever made me believe I couldn't do something. So I knew there was a limit, but there was a time when he made me believe I could do anything.
And these were the fights you guys were you actually were betting on, and that's what the money was for.
Yeah, some folks bet. I never handled money, but some folks did. And I would get some kickback sometimes, but not every time. We would just do it to say that we won.
Miguel, it's your almost like I think what you refer to as a dojo storm. It's one dojo shows up, challenges to fight. We got this young teenage kid. Yeah, they said that you were just a savage in that area when you were a kid. Yes.
There was so many things. There was so much that went on. I mean, we were part of the 70s in particular, because I started young. I was 8 years old when I started training with kids in my neighborhood who were training formally, but I never got formally into the dojo because I didn't have any money. So one of my teachers took me to the dojo, and I sat outside, wouldn't go in during class, and I sat there every day. And then one of Master Heel Cho's students, who was a PKA fighter back in the day, they all fought PKFL. One of my teachers fought Bill Wallace. One of them fought Demetrius Havanas. But they were big kickboxers back in the day. So he saw me every day in the summer sitting outside the school, and he says, hey, ask that kid if he wants to vacuum the floors. So I went in, I vacuumed the floor really nice. And he says, if you do this once a week, clean this place, you can have free lessons. And that's how I actually started my lessons.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Let's talk about UFC 1. So Horian gives you the invite.
Yep.
It's in Denver, Colorado, higher elevation. How do you, what's your communication like with Art Davie, matchmaking, things of that nature? Bring us through the initial kind of connection with the UFC.
Well, in the original, they said, you want to do this? I said, yeah. And so as they were booking the matchmaking, everybody that they were getting had a title in something. And the only thing I had was point karate titles. And I didn't want to use them because to me, I was going to look like, people look at point karate as it's not real fighting. And I didn't want to use it because I didn't want to be essentially, I guess, laughed at. But I didn't want to use a point karate title, so you won a trophy, but I could have used it. These guys all had kickboxing titles, shoot boxing titles. You know what I mean? If you're going into that realm and you say I'm a point karate guy, and it's too bad because I think Ray Wizard was one of the guys who had a point karate title. And I'm not sure if Pat Smith had actually his was Kyokushin, but I didn't want to use it. So they said, you don't have a title. If you could come up with something, we could put you in the main event. But if you don't, he says, we're going to bring you in as an alternate. And if you win the alternate fight, you'll fight in UFC 2. I said, oh, so I didn't want that. And originally the alternates weren't going to fight, but the fights went so quick that night. Horian came out and said, come on, everybody's working tonight. So me and Trent Jenkins wound up fighting that night. If not, that fight wouldn't have happened. If those fights would have gone too long, they'd have said, oh, no need.
Okay. So you fight with Trent Jenkins. There's a misconception. Well, here, in modern day mixed martial arts, the alternates fight first. In the UFC 1, they were still figuring it out. Were you the first fight in UFC 1, or were you right before the main event?
No, right before the main event. So
Told you, Miguel.
Yeah, that's how it happened.
And
So,
like, when did you get informed that you were actually fighting?
it wasn't long before. It might have been just at the intermission, or it might have been just like a fight before. But it was when they realized this card has gone too quickly. So that Horian came out and said, everybody's working tonight. So,
All right. So you had mentioned titles were super important at the first UFC for announcement. I think that's where we come into the 150-0 and like the crazy, European bare knuckle, titles of events that may or may not have taken place. So they were almost encouraging you to come up with a title.
Not in so many words, but it was look, if you can come up with something, you're in. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't bring myself to fabricate just to do it. But I figured, we'll see what happens. I didn't want to use a point fighting trophy. I had a couple, and I didn't want to use that as that's my championship, because to me it wasn't a real championship. But it is what it is.
Jason, can you tell us, what was the feel back? And you might have already covered this when I was gone, but just the feel at UFC 1. I mean, did anybody really understand what was going on there and what they were getting involved with, or was it all kind of, oh my God, what are we doing here? Can you give us like a description of how that was? Just even like the fighter meeting and all that type of thing. Well,
I can tell you, I never saw the caliber of fighters all in one room that I saw till that event. And I also I'd never been in front of a crowd like that. I forget how many people were there, but like when, for example, when Taylor Tooley fought and Gerdou kicked his teeth out of his head, I was close enough to see his teeth fly out of his head. And I saw the sponsors that were there for, I think it was World's Gym or Gold's Gym, get up and just be like, yeah, not so much. And they walked out. When Ken tapped Pat Smith, because he was a Denver native, the crowd erupted in bedlam, and all of a sudden, spitting, throwing, I don't know if they were drinking, throwing cans, beer cans, bottle, I forget, but it was like crazy. So then when I'm walking out there, it's just as bad because I'm fighting a Denver native. So now they're already pissed off about Ken and Pat. So it was just like, blah, blah, but you could hear them just cursing us out. And I was like, this sucks. In my head, I'm like, this is horrible. But that's the way it was. Madness. I thought somebody was going to die that night just from audience excursion, but it didn't happen.
What about the original fighter meeting where the fighters were kind of angry because Horian had his brother Royce in there, as well as picked the referees? It was pretty much his tournament. There was almost a standoff. That's what at least Art Davey describes.
Well, the real standoff happened. It got some intensity at a point where Zane Frazier was asking some questions about the contract, and Horian was trying to answer it. Horian was trying to explain to everybody, if you want this show to go big, don't be a certain way. If you just become a defensive fighter, the whole thing's just going to be boring. And he was trying to give everybody the heads up about, it's a real deal, but don't make it suck. And at some point, Zane Frazier became really concerned about something in the contract and about getting paid. And then Zane lost his cool for a second. He said words to the effect of, he says, I'm not signing any goddamn contract. And Horian stepped right in and went, it's not a like he was going to fight Zane right there. It's not a goddamn contract. So Zane was doing a little bit of bickering back and forth. And Hickson stood up for a second. And he had something to say, like he was like, if you want it, let's bring it on now. I'm in the back with the guy that I had with me, and I'm just watching this thinking, all right. And Pat Smith was already kind of out of his mind. He was talking all kinds of crazy words, and I'm thinking to myself, this is nuts. And then Taylor Tooley ended it all by standing up, because they were bickering about little things that didn't really matter, and I didn't care. Taylor Tooley stands up. He says, more or less, words to the effect is, "I came here to fight. Sign the friggin' paper." And he signed it and walked out. And that shut everybody up, because they were bickering about stuff that somebody who's never been in the business wouldn't even know about, and I didn't. But Zane, probably looking back, Zane had a point about things. How do we know this isn't going to happen? That's not going to happen. But Taylor Tooley set everybody straight.
That's an awesome story. You know what I think it was? I think it was that there was no clear path. Like, okay, so you win your first fight, you fight again. Let's say you lose that fight, but you've participated in a second fight. What's that party's? What's your compensation as the tournament progresses? We know the finalist wins 50,000. What about the semifinalist? Like, none of that was defined in the contract. So I think Zane was actually, doing everybody a little bit of a favor. Maybe he was too ahead of his time.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I did a similar favor. I was conscripted for the UFCJ, and I was being taken care of by Pancrase. So I had no vested interest. Like, I wasn't getting money from UFC for doing it. But in the fighters meeting, I stood up for a few things that I knew had happened to me over time with, the business. And I only did it for the other fighters. And I could see the Meyerowitz and some of the guys were like, they must have been thinking, what are you complaining about? We're not even paying you. Somebody else is paying you. What do you care? And just at the time, only because I knew if they did it to me then, I'm sure they're doing it to them now. So I just felt like I got to do something. I felt it. I did it. I didn't care.
Let me take it back to UFC 1 if I can then. So, in other words, Ken Shamrock defeated Pat Smith, a Denver native.
Yep.
And you faced off against Trent Jenkins, a Denver native. Was that what helped you make the connection to Pancrase and to Ken and those people? Is that how you got sent over there eventually, or is there?
Yeah, there's two things. First was Ken was looking. He was looking to procure fighters anyway, so that was part of his business. And the second thing was, when I met Ken before the fight, I said to him, I said, "Watch out for Royce." I says, "He's got a really good choke, really good rear choke." And he said, "Ain't no 175-pound karate guy going to choke me out." And I thought, all right. So Bob Shamrock, who was like a father to me, he treated everybody like his kid. He was a really good man. That stuck in Bob's head that, I guess he respected what I knew. He respected that I said it. And he liked me. In other words, I think he thought well of me as a person. And he thought, this is a guy that we should give a chance. And so Bob was on me about, you really should do this. You really should do this. And at the time, I wasn't crazy about the idea of it. But over time, he gave me some films. He says, check this stuff out and tell me what you think. And in those days, I couldn't get a job. So that was my next step. But Bob was really the impetus for it. I mean, Ken wanted it too, because he wanted to conscript fighters, because he needed to build his base. But Bob was really the guy who said, take him.
So to backtrack, Taylor Tooley, in typical Hawaiian fashion, he was just there to scrap. I mean, there was just something about people from that island, man. It really is.
Polynesians, man. Oy.
Yeah. All right. Your pay as an alternate fight, was it different than the people that just competed in the first round?
Well, for a fact, I know that some people got, like Art Jimerson got a ton of money just to show. Gerard Gerdou got a bunch of money just to show. I got, I think it was $1,500 for the night, and that was it.
Okay. And what was it like afterward? Did you realize that you participated in something truly historic that would, I mean, be the pinnacle of combat sports, years later?
Well, all right. So after the fight, it was a great feeling, obviously. You're on TV. You can't believe you were on TV. But at the same time, you don't think too much of it in the way of, who's going to remember this. And then when we tried over after UFC 2, when we tried to get sponsors and things like that, and everybody was like, no way. no way, because everybody had it in their mind. This is nuts. This is bad. This is never going to go anywhere. And look at it today. But yeah, we couldn't make headway in those years.
You won with the rear naked choke against Trent Jenkins.
Yeah.
That term wasn't even coined yet at that time. Did you have any groundwork in terms of like formable experience at this point, or were you just kind of making it up as you went?
No, I had a judo teacher from when I was a kid that when I knew that I was going to do UFC 1, I had to go and look him up, and he was still training in Kyokushin at the time. And I went and I found him, and I told him what I was going to do, and I asked him if he would train me for it, and he agreed, yes. So I went back and trained judo as intensely as I could, in addition to having to train everything else. But I had some judo experience, but mostly for the stand-up for throws. The groundwork, nothing.
So right after this, do you go right in with the Lion's Den?
No. So UFC 2, Ken was supposed to fight in UFC 2. And I was on the card. I made the card by virtue of winning the ultimate fight. And at the time, just before the fight, Ken broke his hand. So I found out only like days before the fight. Art called me, says, "Did you hear about Shamrock?" I said, "No." He told me he broke his hand. So he needed to go to the fight anyway because Pancrase wanted him to conscript fighters for Pancrase. So he came out anyway. And when he came out, he had, I think he had some videotapes for me. Maybe, I forget, but he spent some time with me. He trained with me, even with his broken hand. He showed me some stuff. First time I ever felt an Achilles hold. Holy cow. But yeah, he trained with me a little bit, talked to me a little bit, kind of blew smoke into me. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." I had enough time to think about it. And then after that is when a few people, there was a guy, I think his name was Kitayama. He did production in Japan. And there were a few other representatives they were reporters from Japan who said, we want to see you over there. Makes you feel good. So really did.
It looks like too that Japan is going to be a match because, like you said, Denver and UFC 1, UFC 2 were a spectacle, and that kind of was a turnoff for you. Meanwhile, over there, you get that whole respect thing. Is that something that Ken also told you was going to be that way, or did that just turn out to be a good connection?
Well, and not only that, I mean, from watching the fights, they gave me the tapes of the fights, and to hear 20,000 people be dead silent and then only erupt when something spectacular happens, where in Denver, you couldn't hear yourself think, and nothing was going on. I mean, it was bedlam compared to, in Japan, to see that many people really observe something, It wasn't until I had seen Pride events and K1 where I heard audiences erupt. It was like a different genre. But for Pancrase, they were very studious about the sport. They really cared about what was going on.
Let's keep it on UFC 2, Big O. So your first opponent is Scott Baker. He's like a Kato Gaku kung fu guy. You're I think a 5-animal kung fu.
Yep.
Was there any like expectations or understanding of how this fight was going to play out?
And so for me, he was, I think he was billed as a Wing Chun stylist. But when he came into the ring, he was wearing a judo gi. So I thought, what's up with that? Right? So I see he's wearing a judo gi, and from what I gather, he was a wrestler. I know that I felt that because when I clinched with him and I went to do the simplest of trying to move him, I couldn't lug him. So what I actually did was I went to the ground. This is something I learned from UFC 1 from Kevin Rozier, I'll tell you that. But I went to the ground, I pulled him in top mount, and then I bridge and rolled him so that I could get on top of him. So I pulled him on top of me in a mount, and then I bridged him so that I was in his guard, then I was on top. It's the only way I could get him down because I couldn't physically move him. He was a lot stronger than I was.
Now with Baker, you seem to take your time and not stress your body out in order to save your hands and maybe yourself physically for the following round. Was that part of your strategy going into that?
No, it was weird because at some point he actually fish hooked me. He reached into my mouth and fish hooked me. So we had a rule in the fight. You could eye gouge or bite, but you'd be fined $1,500. Even if you won So if you won the fight, you move on as the winner, even if you won by biting, but it cost you $1,500 every time you did an infraction. They didn't penalize me, but he fish hooked into my mouth, and when he did, I bit hard as I could so that he pulled it out. And then at some point when I got him, I don't know if it was through his guard or I was mounted, but I headbutted his skull into the ground as hard as I could. And I felt bad after I did it because I was like, that could have killed him. I could feel it. It was just nothing between him and my forehead. And I felt I didn't like the feeling. There was no animus, no reason to do it. So, but I didn't pace myself so much because right away, we were only there a few days before. Right away, I could feel the oxygen going out of my body. And then after that fight, I remembered I was in a stretcher for the longest time trying to get oxygen. I thought I was going to die. And I remembered Horian coming up and talking to my second. He goes, "Is he going to make it for the next round?" And my second goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Good." But I was literally dying from altitude sickness. That sucked.
Wow. Wow. So going into Royce Gracie, your second fight, it was rumored that you were at this time a blue belt under Mario Sperry. Is there any truth to that?
No, I've never met Mario Sperry.
Okay, that's fair. So it's a rematch with Royce Gracie. I think he held on to I shouldn't say I think, he obviously held on to the armbar for an extended period of time. Was there any bad blood between you two based on the fact that you had already done a Gracie challenge against him?
No, the weird thing that made bad blood, and I don't know, it's everybody's got their ethos, but after the fight, in that fight, when I shot him with a side kick, and he blocked me with a front kick, and he broke the little bone in my leg, the fib tib, the little one, tibia. And so after the fight, he saw me in crutches. And when he saw me in crutches, "Hey, what happened?" I told him what happened. And I said to him, I says, I want to fight you again. And he got indignant. He didn't like the fact that I wanted to fight him again. I mean, we're fighters. Isn't that what we want to do? But after that, there was a period of time where it was just like, I don't know what it was. But maybe, from his family's ethos has got to be that if anybody who wants to fight you is your enemy. I just don't view it like that. To me, it's just a sport.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see he just beat you. You want to fight him again? It's the Brazilian machismo. Which, man, they're world champions for a reason. Coming out of that country.
Look at Enzo with his arm folded in half and not, just looking at the ref. I mean, really? I'm sensitive to pain. I hate it.
All right. So when they were talking about yourself in UFC 2, Ken Shamrock put his name on you, saying, "I'm going to try to bring this guy to Japan. He's got a bright future." Did you join Lions Den at all in your career? I had figured it was right after UFC 1.
I joined Lions Den after UFC 2.
Okay.
To fight in Pacrase.
Okay. Did you get jumped in?
What do you mean?
All right. So it's kind of every beginning Lions Den guy says that there's a time where you have to get jumped in by somebody in order to be accepted into the gym.
Initiation? No, I did not initiate.
Really?
Yeah, I did not, and neither did Sean Doherty, because we had been in UFC 1.
They already had establishment, Mike. I think that's what you do to brand new guys. Like when you go over in Pancrase, I know I went there, they had the new boy, the young boys, and they treated I wasn't like that when I went there. I was already considered elevated because I was already fighting for that. I'm sure it was the same thing with Jason. I mean, Lions Den was with that, the Pancrase mentality. They already had that. So probably what they learned there, they couldn't do that to Jason. He's already fought in the UFC.
Well, I think you may be right too, is that part of it would be if Ken would have given me the initiation that he or others would. I don't think anybody else in there could have initiated me like that, but Ken could have. And those initiations made Rodney King look like nothing. You have to see, those initiations were frigging brutal, unbelievable. I'm half torn. If I tell you the story of Frank Shamrock's initiation, I don't know if I should, but I kind of wish everybody would know because it was the most awful, god-awful thing, and it was filmed. And
Let's hear it.
I filmed it.
Really? So Scott Bessac we had, I mean, just a little leeway. Scott Bessac, or segue, I should say, we had him on, and he brought us through it, and he said, like, the police should have been called.
Scott Bessac was Ken's #1 initiator. You could not tell his ferocity by his fight record. But if you saw him initiate, and he initiated some guys who were Division I wrestlers, 220, 230, and there was one guy that he mauled this guy for 15 minutes on his back, and you could hear the guy's ribs crunching as he would hit him with elbows in the ribs. Scott was an unbelievably ferocious initiator, but Ken was the he didn't want any of that. It was just unbelievable.
So Frank Shamrock comes out of prison. Bob takes him in. Ken and Bob, like Scott Bessac told us, they didn't even know each other. They just, you know, had one common person, Bob Shamrock. And so Ken, like he initiated Frank. How long did it go for?
20 minutes. And in the whole thing started. Frank, when I first met him, had hair down to his ass. He looked like a Cherokee. And he started the fight with, he didn't know. He had no idea what was going on. He didn't even know what the word tap meant. So at some point in the fight, Ken grabbed him by the hair and broke his nose clean flat off his face, like sideways. And so at one point he puts him down on the ground and he heel hooks him. And we're yelling tap. He doesn't know what the word tap means. He has no idea. He had no martial arts experience whatsoever. He turned it over, tore his knee out. You could hear his ankle popping. And this is 5-6 minutes into the fight. At some point, he chokes him completely out. While he's unconscious, I'm sitting there. He's right on the edge. I'm sitting on the outside of the ring. He's throwing up into his own mouth and choking, and he's passed out. So you can see my foot come into the camera, and I resuscitate him off his chest, and then I roll him over so that he doesn't choke on his own puke. He wakes up and finishes the initiation. It was friggin' unbelievable. Frank Shamrock is manly. You had to see, and that's not the most manly thing he did either. That's the messed up part of it. Frank Shamrock is manly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was so bad. This is a kind of funny story. They all knew the Lions Den from Texas. They all knew, you know, it was a rough place, and they were rough too. When the first time I met Trey Telligman, I had lived there for a year in California at the Lions Den, and then when I came back, I was now going once a month, every month from Massachusetts, but I would go out and visit periodically. So the first time I went out and I met Trey. Have you ever seen Trey's got that dent in his chest?
Of course. Yeah, he's got like a peck. Yeah.
So when I met, I said, if you don't mind me asking, what happened to your chest? And he goes, when I initiated, Ken stomped me and caved my chest in. And when he said that, I went, that mother, because it's believable. And when they saw my reaction, they all laughed because they knew it's believable. So they all busted out laughing. They're like, no, that's not how it happened. But it was crazy. It was crazy.
I don't mean to jump in. It's great, but I think Trey actually lost it at 5 years old. He lost his pectoral muscle in an accident.
That's what he told me. That's what he told me. I think
it's like a paralyzed pectoral muscle. Good call, Miguel. Were you there when Jerry Bolander was cutting his teeth?
I just got there. I came for a visit. That was the same visit I think I might have met Trey at. And I had actually rolled with Jerry Bolander a little bit. And he had not yet fought. But yeah, I had seen him just for a couple of fights. I was at his fight in Hawaii, and I wasn't there for when he fought Gary Goodrich. I wasn't there for any of that.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, real quick, when you guys were there, you know, early on with the Lions, then did you guys really have a good sense like this is the best camp one of the best camps in the world right now? You know what I mean? I obviously knew, you didn't even know the things going on in Pancrase, but did you know how good you guys were as far as the sport went there? How kind of unique situation you guys were in? Yeah, you could Frank and I, we were as close as two people could be for a long time. And you would do this, you know, you would project your future and you would see, you know, where you were and where things were going. And it was at its most organic state. Whereas right now, it's what do I say?
homogenized. It's everybody knows what you got to do to get this thing done. It's funny because you're a great example of that, Chris. When I met you, they had told me you were Tangsudo. You had some traditional training.
Little bit, just from one of my instructors was the Tong Sudo guy, but I was a wrestler, and then it just
And I knew my wife was at that fight, and my wife had said, she said, do you think he's going to go far? I says, I think he's going to explode, and she goes, I think so too, because there's at the organic level to have what you had. You know, to this day, a lot of my students would ask me, what do you think it would take to beat Khabib? And I says, there's two people that I know that have exactly the right makeup. It was you and Mikey Burnett.
Wow, thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, for real, because it takes that type of fighter needs a certain intensity. You know, Matt Styles make fights, and there's a certain intensity, and there's a certain, it's a spiritual intensity, but it's also a technical intensity. You have it. And people go, yeah, no, for sure. And at that level, back then, it was organic. So everybody came in, they were still if you came in as a karate guy, you were a karate guy who had a minor in wrestling. If you were a wrestler, you were a wrestler who had a minor in jiu-jitsu. Now everybody is, it's equal all the way across the board, and it's just so high level that it's something for, I often think, I saw that Roy Jones Mike Tyson fight, and I thought it would be interesting if you got a bunch of guys that are in our 50s to go do a match, but only in our age group, because that's too intense down there. Like the knuckle, that's crazy to me.
I love right now. They're some people are trying to bring back more of the Pancrase style, because to me, you get older fighters that'd be perfect for them. You don't want to do the elbows and the knee, and the hard punches. But the true Pancrasian style was mainly submission based, and it was considered rude to be even striking somebody hard. You know what I mean? So I think that you over well now with a lot of people. They still know the older fighters.
Yeah, and I think the style that it is versus, for me, ground and pound does nothing to enhance the dignity of the sport. A lot of people, it's important. We got to keep it. It's never going away. But if you ask me, look at what submission is. If you're a dominant wrestler, you already got the guy. What is the sense in pounding his brains in? It's martial arts. If you want to do it the other way, it's martialism, and that's a different book. But it is what it is right now.
Your first fight in Japan, how does it happen? And if you look at your opponent, it's Funaki, the co-founder of Pancrase. So it's a pretty tall order just to get to Japan at this time from the United States, and then to fight the co-founder of Pancrase. It's both an honor and a curse, depending on how you look at it.
Right.
This sounds like Ken matchmaking.
Yeah. So I had heard, and I had heard just people snipping about it, that he was supposed to initiate me in that fight. In other words, he was supposed to drag me the whole distance to make it, and basically work it. And I got lucky. So I think in the process of that, because a lot of people say, oh, it was a work, he put you over. Okay, you can say what you want, but I heard the snippets were that he was supposed to drag me out rope escape to a rope escape. He was going to tire me out and then maul me down. But it didn't happen that way. Any truth to it? I have no idea. That's just the nature of the beast.
You won by knee bar in just over a minute. You guys actually fought 3 times. You went 1 and 2 against him.
Yeah.
Leg injury and heel hook are your other 2 outings against him. What was your relationship with Funaki?
Funaki is a very distant character, and he's not close with anybody in a sense. When you're doing business, you're doing business. Ken used to say about doing business over there, when they want something, they're your best friend, and when they don't, it's like they don't know you. And weird things would happen. I give you an example. Guy Mezger was fighting Bas Rutten, okay? And he was doing a really great job of dominating all aspects of the fight. And at some point in the fight, they were on the ground wrestling. The guy could control Bas very easily. So Funaki sends one of the fighters out to tell our corner. I don't want to say who the fighter was, but he says, he comes out and he says, Funaki said, tell Guy to go for a knee bar. So, okay, Guy, go for a knee bar, go for a knee bar. So he goes for a knee bar, and Bas counters him and taps him out. Right after the fight, Bas stands up and says, "I'd love to thank Funaki for working with me on the counter to the knee bar." Yeah, all business. All business. That's the way shit rolls. Well, look at Chris Lytle is the only guy I know that they force-fed. They made him eat bowl after bowl of chanko to make weight. You know, cutting weight's one thing, but forcing a guy to eat to make him fatter, really? That is the craziest thing I'd ever seen.
That was the worst, man. I couldn't eat anymore. They were making me, they're like, you have to weigh this. And I was like, first of all, Phil's put me in the wrong weight class, but then I had to gain like 6 pounds, and gaining weight's harder than losing. I couldn't do it anymore. It was so tough. I was like, you can weigh less. And they're like, no, eat. And I was like, oh.
That was the
hated it.
Yeah, they were horrible. They would do horrible things. I mean, it's just, you know, you ever see the episode of The Simpsons? Homer gets to Japan and he's got to make money to get home, so he does a game show. And in the game show, he answers something wrong, and the guy says, "In your country, you reward knowledge, in ours, we punish ignorance." And they burn his face with a flame. Like, that's how they are. That's just how they are.
What about your experience with Matt Hume? When you had fought Matt Hume, he's got an interesting Pancrase career. Go ahead.
That was an interesting. It was a really good fight for me because Matt Hume was a really talented wrestler, and so when we were on the mat, you know, if I'm fighting a wrestler, wrestlers are horrible when they're on top because their base is so overpowering, it's so overwhelming that if you're punching me, it sucks. It's all day long. But because he was trying to do submission, he was patient, but he didn't know a lot of submission. So when he was on top, I could feel how he was using balance and control, much like an Aikido guy does. He's using mostly just his hands. And I feel that with certain guys. I felt that with you. I felt it with people where not really touching me. When I would move, you'd touch me. But if I didn't move, very light, like a spider's web. And that's how he was. He wasn't using overwhelming force. He was using all technique. I think he was more leery of me knowing submission because he knew he didn't know as much. So that gave me a lot of edge. But if not for that, if it was a ground and pound, it could have been a very different thing. Because I know as a wrestler, he had a better base. He also kicked me in the balls more times than anybody in one fight.
You're muted, Miguel.
Oh, sorry about that. With Ken Shamrock in UFC 3, were you in his corner?
Mike, your
Were you
camera's
fighting
on.
UFC 3?
Were you in UFC 3 with Ken when he pulled out of the tournament?
Was Chemo in that fight?
Yes.
Yes.
Chemo
yes,
fought Royce.
Yes, I was. Yeah, I was in that, and I'm not sure if that's the one where I jumped the fence and John McCarthy yelled at me. I jumped the fence to go in right after a fight, one of the fights, and John McCarthy was like, "Get out of here."
Now, wasn't that the fight where Ken said if he's not fighting Royce, he doesn't want to fight, and he just withdraws? Was that what happened in that one?
I think so, because Royce had to pull out for whatever
When
reason.
he fought Chemo, he couldn't continue.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So was Ken just like obsessive? I got to get this rematch with this guy. Is that what that was all about?
I think it was. There was a lot going on in his head. He had a lot going on at the time. In the early time when I had met Ken, in the time that I had spent out there for the year, he had just reunited with his, I guess you would say, his estranged mother. So he hadn't seen his mother since whenever, you know. I forget what the circumstance was. And she looked him up, and they met. I met her once, and shortly thereafter she died.
Ooh.
So yeah, he had just a lot of turmoil in his life that I remembered going on, and I'm sure a lot that I don't even know about. But I think over time it wears on you, and I mean everything else, the stress and the pressure that the company puts on you, and he's representing two companies, so he's fighting for UFC, and he's also got to represent Pancrase, and he can feel the pressures going on, that because he told me when he brought me in, he gave me the lecture like Don Corleone to Michael. You know, like at this point they're gonna have a meeting. You're gonna be assassinated. It was kind of the same. They're gonna squeeze me out. They're gonna bring you in. Over time, you're gonna notice he told me straight up. He says they're gonna squeeze me out. They're gonna bring you in. He says, and then they're gonna be your best friend when they want something, and as soon as they don't, like they don't even know yet, and then they're gonna squeeze you out next. You know, he gave me the straight.
With UFC 3, the rumor was that Bob Shamrock and Ken were having a pretty serious argument in the locker room in regards to it. Were you privy to that?
I was privy to a lot of what went on. So for UFC 3, all I'll say is, this is only my guess, and Frank and I had the similar guess. We saw Bob on the phone, and his face was stressed red, and all I could think of was that there was money on that fight. That's all I could think of, and Frank was thinking the same thing. I don't know, but that's all I was wondering about. And yeah, Bob was not happy at that time. He was really upset, but at the same time, I mean, I'll tell you about the stress of it. When we were down there training, we were training with I think Jesse Ventura had a gym, not Jesse Ventura, the pro wrestler guy with the beard and the cowboy hat. Oh damn, I can't think of his name. Anyway,
Pro wrestler, beard, cowboy hat.
Yeah,
from California or Texas?
No, down in Carolina, Charlotte. Damn, not Jesse. Shit. But if I think
Orton,
I'll think of it 10 o'clock at night. But we trained in the gym, and when we were training, Ken was just out of his mind doing stuff like. So he had me doing shoots on him, and when I shot low. He sprawled, and he right in the back of my head with his elbow, right in the back of my skull. So I'm starting to feel like, all right, I'm going to throw up. I'm having a concussion. I go sitting on the dock, and I'm sitting there, and I can see Funaki's looking at me like, you know, I'm out there sitting and waiting, and then I hear Funaki comes walking out. Same thing. He sprawled. He hit him in the back of the skull with his forearm. He hurt a couple other people in there, and that's just, you know, that's his mindset at the time. I don't think his mind was right. I think part of it was, I think he lost. Well, okay, give you a good example. When he knew he was going to fight Royce for one of these fights, I can't even remember which fight it was. We were training, and I told him about Hadaka Jime was you grab your gi from the front when you face a guy, and you go like this, and you choke him facing him like this. And so Funaki said, I'm going to show you how to get out of this. He says, you be Royce. I said, okay. So I got in Funaki's guard, and I put it on him. And as I put it on him, he pretended to go limp. And then when I let up, he exploded to get out. So when he did that, I put him out. And I think in Ken's mind, it registered as, if Funaki can't get out of it, how the fuck am I going to get out of it? And I think a lot of things weighed in his mind that made him unsure, but I can't be sure. I know that, like, one of the things that made him crazy was they went to Machado's school, him and Funaki, and they trained there for a day, you know, just as we're going to go have fun. And I think when they got schooled with the gis, I didn't think they realized, you know, how much of an art it is, because they used to joke about, yeah, jiu-jitsu is only this, it's only that. And they used to say it's not submission. Well, I got news for you. Yes, it is. So I didn't really got in his head.
Wow. Yeah, Ken was pretty intense guy, you know, inside the cage and out.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to stick my neck out there. Was the pro wrestler Arn Anderson?
No, it was a really famous guy. He's dead now. Damn it.
Dusty Rhodes?
No. Beard. Dark beard.
Okay.
Randy Savage. Randy Savage.
Oh, he's not a cowboy.
But he wore a
Macho Man, bro.
But he wore the hat.
Cowboy hat.
Oh, you know what? It was. You know what? Okay. Yeah. I like Macho King. That was my favorite version of Randy Savage, but you know, I digress.
Did he show any interest? Did Macho Man show any interest in what you guys were doing and stuff, or was he not there? Only because I always heard the rumor that he was, like, you know, he was one of the top stars, but at some point, like, he got pissed off at one of the other top stars, and he went after, I think it was Hulk Hogan. It may have even been like that level of stuff. Was he anywhere around what you guys were doing?
I met him before we trained in his gym. We were training in one of the spas in the weightlifting gym, and I met him there. Me and Frank, we just talked to him for a little bit, and you know, he seemed like, you know, you guys, what you guys do is cool, but he didn't seem like he wanted to wanted to have anything to do with it. I just knew Ken knew him.
Cool.
And, he let us use his gym. It didn't seem like
That's
he was really want to go that way.
When did you decide to move to Japan full time?
I never moved there full time, so I used to go once. Yeah, I used to go once a month, 1 week a month, and then at the end of the first turn, after Frank first went there, he lived there for a month, and then he debuted, and then after that, I wanted to go live there for a month and train. So I did a few years where I did a month and train. Then I started to do 2 months in train, and after so long, I didn't do it anymore. But so I, 1 week a month for, the better half of a decade, and then a month a year, sometimes 2 months a year, one time 3 months a year. In fact, the time that I met Chris was I was there for 3 months.
Miguel, how many fights does Jason have in Japan?
Well, it looks like 50 exactly. According to the record that's official, obviously we're not talking about all the early stuff he was mentioning, but 33, 21 and 1, and I think we can count the 5 fights outside of the UFC. I'm sorry, outside of Pancrase, and then that would be 50 in Japan in Pancrase.
Wow. And you never lived there?
No, not full time. No, because I do something, and I'll tell you the thing that I know, because I didn't even know if my Seikendo match is listed in there, but this is a true story. I've told it before. I don't know if anybody wrote it down. So my last full-length contract in Japan, I get a call. They had me train for a fight with Suzuki. It was a catch wrestling match. So they had me train. I trained like a month and a half, I think, for catch wrestling. It might have been a month. I don't even know. But catch wrestling was basically pro wrestling, but real. So, okay, I did. The day before I left, I get a call, and he says, you have one more fight left on your contract in order for your contract to be complete. I says, yes, but there's also a stipulation in the contract that says, if by no fault of my own, my contract is not fulfilled, in other words, you guys didn't get me the amount of fights that my contract requires, it's not my fault. I'm at the end of my contract. I've got a week left, and I booked for this fight. And he says, well, we have a solution. There's a match in Seikendo. What's Seikendo? It's a Russian Thai boxing kind of match with throws and limited ground fighting, like 10 seconds on the ground. I said, when is it? He says, right after this match. I says, I've been training for a month and a half for catch wrestling. You want me to jump into a Thai boxing match right after? Yes. And I was like, really? So the story gets a little weirder. I says, okay, and this is not the first time this type of thing has happened with me, but I'll give you the short of it as quick as I can. Okay, I fight Suzuki and I beat him. They said, okay, you got a few days, you can get ready for this fight. I said, okay. Fight time comes, and at that time in Tokyo, it's kind of cold. Tokyo doesn't get freezing like Hokkaido, but it's cold. So he says, we got to go to the gymnasium early. You got to weigh in. I says, I'm fighting unlimited. What do I need to weigh in for? He says, because I need to weigh in. All right. So we go to the gym, and it's like 5 hours early, and I weigh in. And so I'm sitting there in the gym. Nobody's there, just whoever's milling around. And he says, the van is running. It's got the heat on. He says, if you want to go stay warm, go in the van. I said, all right. So I go down to the van, and I'm waiting, and I'm sitting, and I'm waiting. All of a sudden, I feel like I gotta fucking throw up. Van is parked against the wall in the parking garage. I get out, I go to the back of the van, I start throwing up. And as I look over, I see there's a end of a tuna fish can laid over the tailpipe. Bam. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's your
All the
explanation?
tricks.
We're trying to do something. Were they trying to kill you, or were they trying to intimidate you? What do you think?
I think it's entertainment insurance. I wouldn't be the first guy. Andy Hoog got whacked out in Japan. He showed up for a fight, and they said he died of leukemia. I think if you got leukemia, that's what they told me. That's not the only time that kind of thing happened to me, but that was the most obvious time. Because what the hell?
Did Ken Shamrock ever get poisoned before a fight in Japan?
It's funny you say that, because there was a fight that I saw him in. I don't know, it might have been Fujita, but there was a fight that I saw him in, where I saw a reaction on, he had to stop the fight, and I saw the reaction on his face, and I hadn't seen this fight till like the advent of YouTube. Like I didn't know half of these guys had fought as many fights as they did till I saw YouTube. I was like, holy shit. And I saw the reaction, and I had the same reaction, I think, in the same match that night, the Seikendo match. But I saw it, and I was like, they poisoned him. So one time, you'll remember this, Chris. I won't mention the guy's name, but you'll remember by how I say it. One time I got in the van. They were taking us from the airport to wherever. And the guy driving the van goes, would you like some water? And I said, sure. I took it and I drank it. As soon as I drank it, it went through me. And I figured out later, and I can tell you how I figured out, but it's an even dumber story. As soon as it hit me, I went, whoa, and I leaned back, like rushed my guts out. And I looked over at the guy, and I started to become like delirious. And he looks at me and he goes, do you feel like you've been poisoned? And I just looked at him like, you mother. Yeah. You know,
man, you know what's crazy about this is I'd always assumed, since you were there so much and you had like a Pancrase jacket, and all, I always thought you were their guy. You know what I mean? I always thought I was the outsider, but apparently all the guys in are the outsider. I thought you were kind of like their adopted son because you were there so much. I thought you were immune to that, but apparently not.
No, it all started to change when there was they call it a Jedi. It's a new era. So all of a sudden, the office people that we were used to seeing, all of a sudden they had new office people driving the van from Hokkaido, from Osaka, and there was all kinds of different business plays being around. All weird shit started happening. So, you know, beyond that kind of thing, a lot of weird shit. But when it started to happen, everybody knows. Well, you remember Hasegawa?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Died.
Fell out of a building.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
It happens. It happens.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. Yeah.
It
happens a lot.
It tripped and fell off a building.
Yeah.
Things happen. Yeah, I remember that was a big deal. I remember that was a big deal when that was going on. Like, oh man, I didn't really put two and two together at first, but then after a while I started thinking, okay, probably not an accident.
Well, you spent so much. I apologize. Go ahead, Jason.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. So you spent so much time in Japan. Do you speak Japanese?
A little bit. When I was there, I was fluent at a child's level.
Okay. But you could probably more understand it than you could speak.
If I'm in an environment for long enough, like if after a few hours of talking to somebody, I get to a level where I can speak, they can understand me, and they know by my level how to speak to me so I understand them. But if you put me watching TV, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay. What was the mafia influence like in Pancrase when you were there?
You're only guessing when you know, having been there so long. It's a lot like this country. Like who runs the garment district in this country? You know what I mean? So when you see a person, what business are you in? I'm in this business. All right, I get it. So like the guy who ran our ring company, I don't know, Chris, if you remember the guy who used to set up the ring. He was actually, I think he was Manoa's uncle or something, but he was missing a pinky. So you'd see these guys around, and different guys from different places. And sometimes this is one really, really weird story. It just sticks in my head when you ask about it. I fought Bob Stines. The hardest punch I have ever been hit with in my life almost killed me. Before the fight, I had never really been put out like this. But before the fight, this Japanese guy comes up to me with an old flash bulb style camera. He goes, "Picture, please." And right away, I was like, wow, that's messed up. I found out later that's only one of many gimmicks. So years later, I fight in Frank Shamrock's shoot box. And the guy who's going down there with me, I tell him the story about, he's asking about, the various things, how they work you, how they mess with you. I says, and watch out for the guy that comes up to you with the flash bulb on the camera. I says, they strobe your eyes out and you're more susceptible to knockout. And he goes, wow, really? I go, yeah. I swear to God, it's the same freaking guy. We're behind the bleachers getting ready. Guy walks up and I said, he goes, "Picture, please." And I looked at Joey and he goes, "Holy shit." I said, "Get out of here. Don't fucking bother me." But that's the kind of shit. So when you say about the mob, over there, Pachinko is their gambling. But because gambling is illegal, you don't get money. You win a bunch of balls. You take them to the guy at the counter. He gives you a bunch of pencils. cool pencils. You go outside and you go to this window and you say, you want to buy these pencils off me? Oh yeah, that's $300 worth of pencils because gambling is illegal.
Yeah.
The fights are kind of the same way. If you want to make money in fights and you know the right people, you can make money, but you don't ever say it kind of thing. You know, they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
You put out a catch DVD, and in it, you had mentioned that you had trained a world champion, but never got credit for it. You never named that world champion.
All right. If the perspective is funny, but at this point it really doesn't matter. When Frank Shamrock came to the Lions Den, Frank Shamrock didn't know anything. Ken was our teacher, but
well, that's confirmed.
Yeah, but
that's
I was
absolutely true.
Yeah, I was Frank's teacher. And that's, I don't like to say it because it looks like I'm trying to take somebody's thunder, but no, I kicked the shit out of Frank every day of his life until I left. And it's not to demean him, and the reason I say that is he became much bigger than I ever was, much like Chris. Chris is if you put me and Chris in a room right now, he would walk all over me. That's how much bigger than me he grew as a martial artist. And Frank was the same. Frank went through, and I'll tell you this story because I've always wanted to tell it, and it's one of those things. Like I didn't want to mention about prison with him because I didn't figure he'd want people to know. But I told him this story he should tell. Like he should write a book. This should be in it. There was a time when he was fighting Suzuki for the title. And personally, I think Ken was jealous. The night before we left, Ken goes, "Come on, Frank, we got to go to the gym and callus up." Takes him to the gym and beats him bare-fisted and breaks 5 or 6 ribs all over his body. Yeah. The night before Frank's fight, I'm in his hotel room with him. And when bones break, in general, for most people, within the first day or two, you calcify. You get these big lumps and wads of calcium. So I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, I'm setting him. And I'm literally helping this kid. He's got all over his body broken ribs.
Oh my God.
Yeah. In the calcium deposits, I'm putting his ribs back in place. Click, 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 click. And he held it together, fought, and won.
Wow.
Right. I've never seen anything like that kid in my life. I mean, I've known there's all kinds of manly. And when I say, manly, it's beyond me because I'm a pussy. I'm really sensitive. It's true. When I feel pain, I can't hold it back. Some people can shut it off. I cannot. I feel it. And he did it. And I don't know that he didn't feel it. I think he's like me. He feels it. And he just went, "I got to do it because if I don't, Bob's going to kill me." That's just the way it was over there. You got to do it because Bob said so. Okay.
Do you think interactions like that kind of forced Frank to leave, or was Ken ever going to accept him as a training partner? What was that chemistry like?
All right. So I'll give you an example. People, I get pissed off because I saw this one English commentator that my fight somewhere was online, and this English commentator, he starts like he's talking nice about me, then he does this passive aggressive talking shit about me. I feel like, no, I wish I could meet this guy in person, push his ears together, maybe twist his head around. So this is the kind of thing Ken would do. I fought Bas Rutten the first time, and I was utterly scared of Bas Rutten. He's Neanderthal. I did not want to fight him.
So let me set the table. It's October 15th, 1994, Road to Championship 5. It's your first bout with Bas Rutten 6, our next fight that we're talking about. Go ahead.
Correct. So in the fight, and I was justified too, because at some point, when he grabs you by the neck, you realize this guy could break my head off. He's strong. Before a fight, I tell people this, before a fight, you see the roadie ladders that they use for the lights? He climbs this roadie ladder 20 feet up, all the way up, all the way down at the bottom, one-handed chin up, with his legs in a split. Yeah. So anyway, I fought him the first time, and at one point in the first fight, I get him to do a rope escape. I heel hook. I have really good heel hooks. He grabs the ropes. Okay, so not long after that, I'm going to fight him again. Before I leave for Japan for the next fight, they tell me, "You're going to fight him next time." And Funaki comes up to me, another classic Funaki. He goes, Do you know your strategy? I go, yes. He goes, what? I go, heel hook. He goes, good. I go, okay. I go home and I'm training and I've got fucking heel hooks coming out of my head. I get to the LA airport and Ken looks at me and he goes, heel hooks are illegal in this fight. They've made them foul. Yes.
What?
Yeah. Like, when were you going to tell me? You know what I mean? Why? Because if I win, that puts him down a level. He didn't want that. Yeah. You know, I appreciate everything Ken did for me, but he also did some things that I don't appreciate too much. But I get it. It's business. He's got to look out for his own interests, you know, but no reason.
Yes and no, but when you're teammates, usually that's out the window. You know what I mean? I mean, usually we're a teammate, you know, usually throw down the ladder once you reach the top to help get them up, not kind of cut the ladder off so they fall. You know what I mean?
Well, I didn't get why, for example, in the UFC that was in Detroit, he came up to me before. He says,
UFC 9.
Okay, so Ken comes up to me, he says, Art Davey and whoever else, they want to talk to you. They want you back to UFC. He says, you can do it, or if you want, he says, but his view was he wanted to be the UFC guy and I would stay in Pancrase. I said, all right. So I agreed to it. So when they asked me, we'd like you to come to UFC, I said, no, thank you. I says, I'm happy in Japan. And that was between them. I had no problem doing that. Well, later on, when they did to him what he knew they were going to do, they squeezed him out. I didn't join Lions Den to fight MMA. I joined Lions Den to fight in Pancrase. And when they asked me to stay with Pancrase, I said yes. And he got incensed. All right. You know, it is what it is. You're the one who told me to stay in Pancrase. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say.
Sounds very unreasonable, man.
Yeah, but it was a bit. It was a bit.
He kept a lot of plates in here, but it's. I wanted to ask you: is the Ken's a very complicated figure, so you can't wrap everything around. But do you think he had like a mean streak gone wrong? Because the story you tell about hurting Frank, there's also a story that he knocked out Mikey Burnett like a week before his world title fight and stuff like that. That kind of need to express yourself like that in the gym and really dominate at a certain level with teammates. A guy like you, I would think, would view that as unnecessary and distasteful. Am I wrong?
No, that's correct. I mean, he had me initiate a guy one time, and a few times. With the one time, I hit this guy ultra hard, palm style, on the side of the jaw and neckline, and his eye dilated to the size of his iris, and you could see. So he said, put him out. And I had already put this kid out a few times. I said, no. And this is in the middle of the initiation. He goes, what? And I walked up to him very softly to his face, and I said, his eye is dilated. If I hit him again, he's dead. He says, don't ever contradict me again in front of the da-da-da-da-da. I was like, I don't care what you say. I mean, doing it. They're like, what were you thinking? But Chris, remember the dojo in Japan?
Oh, yeah.
Those pictures of those two young boys? You know what happened to them, right?
I've heard at least one of them, but not all of them.
Well, both of them were whacked by the same guy in training. Let's just put it that way.
I know that was. Man, now speaking of that place, I mean, I still have. I mean, I was still very new when I was training there. I remember it was in '99. I went and stayed there for about a month and a half, and still have very good memories of living in that dojo for a month and going down, walking down to the bathroom, 100 meters away, wherever.
Yeah.
Just did you stay in that gym a lot? Is that where you stayed, or did you stay in the one in Tokyo?
No, I was always in the one in Yokohama.
Okay.
When I would live at the dojo. The time that I spent 3 months, I actually lived at a friend's house.
Okay.
And the Yokohama dojo was when you were getting earthy. That was the crazy place. If you stayed there, you knew what it was.
Oh yeah. Love.
Did you ever interact with Enson Inoue when you were in Japan throughout your travels?
Funny that you should say it, because I think it was UFCJ. I had seen Enson. I had known, and this was after he fought Frank, but I had seen him, known about him. And for whatever it was, I forget. But when I saw him at UFCJ, I believe it was, he looked at me and I looked at him, and he just reached down the stairs and he shook my hand. And that made me really happy because for whatever it was, I think he felt, I kind of felt the same thing because we didn't know each other, but people were always trying to cause trouble. And we were like, I don't think he was like that, you know? But, you know, I don't know him. I just that one time, he just reached out and shook my hand. And I appreciate it because you're never sure of who's thinking what, and, especially from opposing teams.
Yeah. Trying to keep all your fights in the ring, not in the locker room.
Try not to.
What was your relationship with Masakatsu Funaki?
It's a distant relationship with him. I don't understand. I don't understand when somebody is in a position where they should be closer than they are. But he was a weird. There was a one time, Chris, you remember Shibuya?
Yeah.
One time Shibuya had come back from Holland, and when he came back from Holland, he looked just like the Predator in the movie The Predator. His body was just freakish. So at the time when I looked at him, I said, he looks just like, I was eating across from Funaki. I said, he looks just like a praying mantis. And so Funaki calls him over, and I don't catch it right away. I'm sitting back and I'm just eating. And I look over my shoulder, and Shibuya had come up, and he's standing like this, in a full-blown praying mantis pose for the entire time that we're eating. It was just like, wow, that's messed up. And that's the kind of, like, one time in the dojo in the morning, sleeping in the, the little shells that we sleep in, I hear this noise. It's like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. And I'm like, what the hell is that? I go out there, and Funaki's got 2 of the young boys in the ring. They've juiced themselves, cut themselves on their forehead, and they headbutt each other. Boom! And the ring is covered with blood over and over. And I'm like, yeah, right? I don't know.
Man, I remember when I was staying there, they had, a couple of the young boys, they were training. I just remember, like, Suzuki choking one of them pretty much, and he's tapping, and he's not letting go until he's almost unconscious and he's barely moving. And then he's like slapping him and keep going. I was like, I was getting kind of upset about that. And then when the kid got out, like, he's yelling at the other young kid and like hitting him in the head. And I was getting pissed off, but then I didn't really understand the whole hierarchy situation of their culture. And it was a very good learning experience. But man, I got pissed off a couple of times at how they did things. I was thinking, man, but you know what? They had like 3 of these young boys. And I come back about 2 months later, there was only one left, and he became a tough fighter. Like the other 2, they weeded out. They're like, we're not dealing with these guys if they're not mentally and physically tough. We're going to push you out. And that's what they did. So it was an interesting learning experience. But now, Jason, I was there a long time. I felt like it was some different fights. I really liked some of the guys. Who do you feel like you were close with from the Pancrase organization, the fighters?
Including, so when you hear me talk about Ken, I can focus on that and show that part of him to you, but I really appreciate everything he did. Who I really loved, I mean, I was as close as could be with Frank Shamrock when we were there, because we lived together. And I was with him through some really, messed up times and stuff like that. I really, I love them all. It's amazing that we're all still alive. I have fond memories of everybody that I can think of, especially who I learned from, like Maurice Smith. To this day, I work with Maurice sometimes. He's doing extracurricular activities outside of sports. But Maurice, as a teacher, there's a guy who could spend 5 minutes with you in the lobby of a hotel and teach you more about Thai boxing than you ever knew. It's amazing. And his spirit, I love his, he's, it's something to be a true gentleman and be able to turn it on and be something that's that fierce. Whereas some guys, the way they are in the ring, that's kind of how they are on the outside. I don't like that so much. But I have fond memories of everybody, just in everybody in their own light. And it's just the way you look at it.
Now let me ask you, in terms of in Japan, Funaki, you said he was distant, and thank you very much for the stories there. Now, But did they ever like you? I would have thought when he went over to do MMA and they were setting up the Hickson fight that you were there. You'd be a natural to spar with him to maybe give him some insight into Royce and Hickson and stuff like that. Am I way off? What were you doing during that period of the crossover to MMA?
A couple of weird things at the same time happened. So I did train with him a little bit before the fight. And that was one of those, we were training in the Daido Juku used to have these helmets that had plastic across the face shield. And we were training in those. And he grabbed the back of the helmet while I was in his guard. And he held the back of the helmet, just kept punching me in the back of the head while holding the helmet. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
This isn't going to help.
Yeah, so I'm literally kneeling on his chest, punching him in the head after that, because when he did it, I was pissed off. And I passed through, and I'm just sitting on his chest throwing punches at him like, what is it? What are you trying to prove? Damaging somebody. After that, I was supposed to be at that fight, and everything was booked up. And then shortly before, I got hey, you've got to do this thing. It was from the office. You've got to do this thing at such and such a time, and it was not going to allow me to make the fight. And I was like, all right. I says, I'm not gonna be there for the fight then. I can't be two places at once. Okay. And then I saw a magazine, and in the magazine, when you opened it up to the centerfold picture, it was a picture of all the Gracies with me somewhere in this, almost in the center, but in the back, like you could see my face with all of them. And I think I was even with Carlos Valente. But it was the weirdest thing, and I think it might have spooked him to think maybe, you know what I mean? So I don't know. Might have spooked somebody.
Okay.
But yeah, when that happened, that was a tumultuous time anyway. There was a lot going on. I don't even making my head a little shrinky.
No, thank you very much for the honesty, Mike.
Yeah, Miguel, one of the questions that you've asked other people, from the Japanese lineage or people that have been involved with it, was Gerdou. When he would brag about sticking his thumb all the way up to the last knuckle into the eye. And was there any threats on his life or any repercussions in regards to doing that?
I never heard anything about it, but I had heard that when he would come to Japan, who was the guy that he fought? I can't remember his name. Well, the guy that he did that to.
The little guy lost an eye. What was the guy's name that lost an eye?
Yuki Nakai?
I can't even remember. But
One more time ago.
I had heard that when Gerdou came to Japan, that he would have to escort him around.
I heard that too. Yeah.
Man, that's brutal.
Yeah.
Imagine, but they have some weird goings-ons over there.
What was your relationship with like Manabu Yamada? I know you had fought a couple times.
He and I got along really well. As he started to get to retire, he kind of changed a little bit, got a little weird, but I think he was weird with everybody. But I liked him. He was a little bit hippie kind of, He seemed, let's say,
positive.
Yeah, I guess. But he was a lot of fun to be around. He was fun to work with when you trained with him. He would try anything new. He would do anything that you wanted.
Minoru Sazuki, you had fought him a couple times as well.
Yeah, Suzuki was another kind of weird. Outside is great to talk to and stuff, but in the dojo a little bit weird. To get drunk with those guys.
I was just gonna say, we've always heard between him and Funaki, Suzuki's the mean one.
He's definitely in the dojo the mean one. Funaki is a civil character in the dojo. He trains hard, works hard, but not cruel. Suzuki could be cruel, to the point of I tell you stories, but I don't want to degrade people who have been through the horribleness. But yeah, he's a little bit of a sadist, a little bit of a.
With those guys too, I think, and this is what I was learning. I feel like a little bit of the hierarchy we talk about. Funaki and Suzuki were up here on the hierarchy, so maybe they didn't feel like they could socialize as much with someone like me. Or I mean, every time I know what you mean by distant. To me, when you say they were distant, like they would be kind to me, but there was never like a friendship that, it was like, hey, Chris, that was it. But it was never on the, I always felt like they were up here and you were kind of on a lower level fight. And that's how I felt about it.
Yep. No, same. And in as much as the side of themselves that they show to me, to you, it's amiable, but it's not, you can tell it's not close. And yeah. I think they were like that with each other. I think the rumors that I hear is that Funaki was not maybe so crazy about Suzuki.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, whoever's going to see this, it is what it is. These are the things that I gather. I mean, other stories, like I'm hesitant. There's a lot of things I'd like to, if I told you this, you'd get that, but I don't want to say it.
Okay.
That's fair.
Yeah, we're going to keep working on it, man. We're going to keep
we're going to keep going. We're going to keep chipping away.
No, this is priceless stuff because
I love it. This is cool.
The podcast is about. Chris said, look, we got to document history. These stories are going to be lost. So everything you said is good as gold here in our book, man. Thank you. Thank you for opening up to us, man.
Yeah, Jason, this isn't a beginner's podcast, so it's like anybody we've got a pretty hardcore following, and it's because of things like this. It's people. I mean, we're here. My next question, Ryushi Yanagisawa. I mean, it's another legendary Japanese fighter. Never made his way to the mainland here in the United States, but if you look at the guy's record, it's a who's who.
Yeah, he's that's another one. Until YouTube, I think he fought Fedor for rings or something.
Yeah, it was huge.
Right, and to me, I was like, I'd never even heard of it. I had no idea that it happened. But he was a guy, and to know him, been through a little bit with him. To know him is to love him. He's a sweet person. Here's a good example of when you say about cruelty. He was in a match with Ken, and Ken heel hooked him, tore his tendons right off of his knee. So he basically separated his upper and his lower leg. So they had to use the Achilles tendon from a dead man to reattach his leg, right? When we were training for one of those fights, I don't think I was there when it happened. That's so brain dead we all are. I don't know if I was there when it happened, but training with him, and this is well over a year because it took him a year of shooting full of drugs to make this thing heal, right? Ken was training for UFC, and Ken did used to call it a kneecap. When you do a change of level and you buck the guy's knee backwards when you do your shot, just like that, and he bowed the same leg backwards and nearly destroyed him. And I'm like, why? Why? But that's the way it was. And he was the kind of guy who that kid never deserved that kind of, like, you do that to someone who deserves it, not to somebody who doesn't. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He was a really nice person.
Crazy.
We've been told that you had a very close relationship with Yuki Kondo.
Yes.
And you guys had fought twice. Would you mind expanding on that?
Yuki is a old school samurai, and he came and lived at my house for 3 months. Yeah, 3 months solid.
So he came to the States.
Yeah.
And where did you guys train at?
I had a dojo in Woonsocket, but I also took him to my lairs where I would train in the woods. I would train in the cemetery at night. I would train all hours of the day, because when you do so much traveling over there, like, my sleep has never been the same. I tell people this. I experienced my birthday 2 days in a row, 2 years in a row. In other words, I lived 24 hours over there on my birthday, flew back here and had another 24 hours on my birthday. That's how messed up it gets. So when we would train, I would try to train on their time. So whatever Japanese time is. So I would train all hours of the day because I couldn't sleep. And the other thing, when you travel that much, Chris, you must have gone through this. How many days did it take you to get the night's sleep after you come back? Because the jet lag going out is bad, but coming back the next week is worse. And you're never the same if you do too much of it, thrombosis and all the rest of it. But so he trained with me whenever I said we're gonna go do this, he'd go do it. And I would do old school training. So we would do things. They actually came over and did a special, and they recorded us. We did some old school kendo and bojutsu. We fought with sticks in the cemetery. The Japanese people, when they saw it, they're like, "You really do that?" So we saw it. Yeah, yeah. We did. So the very first day that he came to train, he came over. The plan was he's going to be here 3 months, and he was planning to fight UFC, and they wanted me to train him. And I said, okay. So he had already fought me and beat me in a Pancrase match, 30-minute long match. So when he came over, I think part of his head, he was thinking, like, I beat you. What are you going to teach me? So he didn't realize the difference between sport and, so I said, okay. We took a few days rest. I said, whenever you're ready, we're going to go start training. So I had my crew of guys that trained, and I told them, don't be there that day. I said, I got something special going on. Okay. So we went to the dojo, and I says, okay, today we're going to do UFC training. Okay. I said, so we're going to do a fight right now. No rules at all. You understand? Yes. So a little bit of Japanese, a little bit of English, but he understood. I says, okay, I'm going to start the timer. You ready? Yes. I start the timer, and I walked up to him, and he walked up to me, and I just unloaded on him. It was over in 10 seconds. He was choked out. And when we were done, I went and I looked at the thing, and I said, I showed him the timer. I says, as of right now, I'm going to call Japan and tell them you can't fight, because he was slated to fight UFC when he came back. In fact, I think the fight he had was Tito Ortiz. I'm not even sure. I can't even remember. But that match was eye-opening for him, because he figured, I fight Pancrase. That's fighting. No, it's not. And you know as well as I do, right? Everything has its nuance. So that moment was, and I wasn't nice. I wasn't kind at all. When I lit up, I just lit up. I went from like we are now to a serial killer. I think part of that was what he didn't get was like, oh my God, I never, had anybody turn on me like that.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen when you do this.
And I think he went over his first fight in UFC. I think he won a very impressive fight, and then I thought he fought Tito the second time and lost that. I think if I remember,
I don't
right,
know.
I thought he not.
Yeah, the fight that he fought. Remember when Funaki fought Hickson?
Yeah,
he fought Hickson's #1 guy on that card, but I don't know if that was a UFC. Was it?
No, that was not. But he did fight in UFC, I thought, once before, and then I thought he won, and then they gave him Tito, and he actually knocked Tito down with a jumping knee, and then Tito just mauled him because he's too big and strong. Like he was like way underweight, I think. But
yeah, most Japanese fighters, they don't have the ability to, or I think knowledge or wherewithal to cut weight.
Cut weight. They didn't have to cut weight. They were all heavyweight. I mean, it was an open weight class forever. You know what I mean? So it was just they didn't have that in their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So.
And I didn't really get that until I fought Bob Stines. I'm thinking, I'm used to fighting everybody any size, and when that guy punched me, I was like, holy shit. 260? Holy shit.
That's a big
Let's
difference.
talk about Bob Stines. April 30th, 2000 at Pancrase. Bob Stines, he's from Warren, Ohio. He's got a 3-1 record. I mean, he's got a win over yourself, Jason, as well as Dan Severn. I haven't seen a Dan Severn fight. It might be a little iffy, but that guy is, in my opinion, he makes my greatest what ifs. He's just one of my top 3 what ifs fighters. Is Bob Stines.
Well, I had to actually go up to him after the fight and ask him about his lineage. I says, you're not just some boxer who came in here and knocked me out. He goes, no. He says, I'm karate. I think he was a 5th Dan in karate. And because his technique was such, and I can tell you this by another experience, Ian Freeman, who knocked him out.
Yep.
Ian Freeman, I fought in England with, you were there. You were at England. When I met up with him in England, we were talking about it. And because I had heard that he had said this, Bob Stines had the freakiest, when he hit you, you couldn't see the punch, and you saw a blue flash, and it was traumatizing. So the first punch that he actually hit me with, I shot in with a like we call a Y bob, hopping in with a straight left, and I hit him. His punch glanced off my body, and it felt like somebody swung a lead baseball bat into me. It only hit me off the shoulder, and I was right away. I was like, "Holy shit! I'm 185 pounds. This guy's 260.
He's a monster."
Yeah, and knows how to punch. The one he finally hit me was he cursed it. He glanced it off my neck, so like basically a brainstem, and I felt it the next day. But he glanced it off my neck, and on my way down, he tapped me, I guess, back in the head. But when he put me out through the neck, it was like being shut off in a plane crash, just going from where you are to nowhere. Versus I had another time when I got knocked out and I saw the back of my head from 8 feet away, and I saw everybody in the arena. I'm not shitting you. And I back into my body, and it was Yamamiya. If you see that fight, I get up and I just start fighting. Out of my mind.
Wow. Man, I was actually at that fight when Ian Freeman fought Bob Sack. I mean, and I'll tell you what, Ian was hurt that fight. Like, he got cracked and he wasn't ready for it. And then he just landed a real good punch on Bob and put him down. And that was it. I mean, I remember I talking to Bob. He was a nice guy. Was he from Ohio? I thought he was from Tennessee. But anyway, he was a big, strong guy. He could hit.
You know, Chris, on the Sure Dog, it says Warren, Ohio. I know nothing about him. I don't know what gym. I even sent Coleman and Sims a text. I figured if he's a heavyweight from Ohio, they got to know him, especially that era. Neither of them knew who he was, so he might.
I didn't think he was from there, really. I don't remember that, but.
I'm going to jump in with another Pancrase name before we, if I'm not mistaken, was it Takahashi who was the first Pancrase guy in like Japanese Pancrase fighter in UFC?
I think he's the one who beat Walid Ismail, beat Royce. Royce got choked out by Walid Ismail in a jiu-jitsu tournament. Yeah. And I think right after that, I think that's the order. I think right after that, Takahashi fought Walid Ismail. Because I think I fought Takahashi right after he fought Walid Ismail.
Okay.
Takafumi Ito, another Japanese legend.
Love that kid.
He had a couple mix-ups with him too.
He's the kind of he's impressive to me for the simple technical factor and visceral. His heart is so strong. He took me running. I used to run. I thought I was a serious runner. He took me running after training one time, and oh my God, almost murdered me. I had to stop. It never really stopped that way. And I was like, all right, I quit. He did it. But fighting that kid, he was much smaller than me structurally. But when you wrestled with him, he was like a swarm, and an artistic swarm. He wasn't just hold you down, but he was another one. You could feel him. He's just holding contact points, not letting you move. And when he would swarm around, it's like, oh my God, will you just let me up? You know, and he could do it with much bigger guys. I was there when he fought Kim Jong-un. Were you there for that, Chris?
I saw him fight Yanagisawa, who was about 100 pounds bigger than him. But
Kim Jong-un he's got to be 3 something. That's the one. You remember he shot in and he kicked him right in the face on a single leg shot and knocked all his teeth out. It was horrible. But that kid that was the kid that Funaki would tell him, go do 1,000 squats, and he would just go do them. Didn't matter if he was at a dinner table. He would do 1,000 squats. Holy shit. But yeah, nice kid. I spent a lot of time with him.
He was one of the guys, I remember when I was staying there, you know, he was a good guy to kind of hang out and talk to, because a lot of guys didn't speak much English, but he would be good, and he was a good guy to work with. And he was probably the only guy I was bigger than there. So it was nice.
You talked about Japan, when UFC went to Japan, UFC 23, you fought Joe Slick. Joe, obviously recently, I shouldn't say recently, passed a few years ago. I think he's one of those underrated entry level, like in terms of mixed martial arts fighters.
Ironically enough, Ken, so we had the falling out when I left Lions Den, but when they came to UFCJ, I made it a point to pull Ken aside. He was talking, he might have been talking to Meyerowitz, I forget. But I went and I put my hand out and I said, I want to thank you for all that you've done for me. And he shook my hand and he was like, you could see it. And he came up to me afterwards at the arena and he says, I appreciate what you said. He says, it just took a lot to suck it in. Because in as much as, when I'm talking about it, it's like, you hate him? No, I don't hate him. That's just the way it was. It was a rough, unbelievable domain. And he was the one who told me, he gave me the heads up. He says, this guy's a submission guy. And he gave me a little bit about what to do. The unfortunateness of my knees being blown out the way they were, nobody's fault. It was the ring itself was, it's funny enough, the original UFC, was padded that way, and the fighters who were stand-up fighters made them rip it out. So that we actually had to wait a day or half a day so they could rip out the mat and put in a regular floor because the stand-up fighters said it favored the wrestlers. So back to the ring in UFCJ, it had a thick mat. I don't know what it is to this day, but they had a thick mat, and that's, I think, part of why I got stuck the way that I did. But it was horrible. It exploded.
You had a really weird, I remember watching that, a really weird, unfortunate incident where it's just like you guys were grappling, all of a sudden your knee got folded up somehow and blew out. I mean, what kind of damage was done there?
It was horrible. For as long as, for well over a month, there was so much water on my knee that I couldn't bend it. I'm like, I'm gonna have to go have it done. So I took extreme measures, and it was blown. I was messed up bad. So I wrapped it with heavy wire, and I did this for a few days. I wrapped it tight, and I started to flex it, like trying to pop it myself. And I did this for a number of days, and it didn't do anything. I was trying to do a squat. I could like bend it like a little bit. So one day I got crazy, and I stood in the doorway, and I was trying to do it, and I had never taken Aleve before. I popped some Aleve that night after I did it, iced the shit out of it. I woke up the next day, and I could move it all the way. Black and blue everywhere. But that was what made it happen. Other than that, I thought I'm going to have to be cut. It's never really been the same since, but it's attached.
So essentially, you had a wrestling shoe on.
Yeah.
Joe was going for an upper body kind of like takedown, and your foot kind of planted on the side, and it was almost like the grip on the shoe didn't allow your foot to move with the movement. Yeah.
It might be. By the time we hit the ground, it's like a heel hold. You know, when the heel hold pops your knee out, but it felt like if all your tendons opened up like rubber bands and latched onto different parts of your knee. It was so bad that I was laying in the back on a stretcher, and I think Yuki Kondo was not happy about my reaction to the pain. So he gestured, like he was gonna be upset with me and kick me. And I was just looking at him like, yeah, it's just the way they are. But it was horrible. I thought my life was over at that point. I thought the tendons were not attached. That's how bad I thought it was.
You didn't have surgery?
No, I took a solid month before I could bend it. And then once I could bend, and that happened in one night. That was me constantly trying to pop it. My knee was about the size of maybe 2, like a football.
Man.
I got a question. You had all those years in Pancrase. You were there in '97 when John Lober had a run, and Lober's a guy that we like to ask about on here because he's another one of those hardcore dudes. Any John Lober stories from over in Japan? Were you there when they broke his leg?
I was there when I was with him a few times, just for the fights and stuff. And as much as you would hear these stories about him and you would see things about him, he and I talked just like we're talking now. We would talk about various things and talked about like Tank Abbott, who I never met. Talking about it, I was like, is that all an act? And he would tell me stories about Tank that he knew of because he knew him. I'd never met him. But then when we went to England, I was so surprised. We went to England for that fight in what it's called, and they brought Tank Abbott in, and I guess he was going to fight somebody over there. And they gave him the microphone, and I was listening to him talk, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this kid's a college graduate. Versus the first time I saw him talking at the UFC, I was like, keep that kid away from people because you never know what's So some guys know how to put it on for the stage, and some guys it's real. I mean, I heard what happened between Tank and Pat Smith in the elevator was real. I wasn't there for it. Yeah, that was bad news. But
to kind of rewind just a little bit, your match with Joe Slick, Dan Henderson was supposed to be the original opponent.
That's correct.
What happened with? Why did he pull out?
I don't think he did. Chris's match was it New Jersey, Chris?
Which one? Atlantic City.
Yeah, okay. So at that match, I ran into Dan Henderson just by quirk, and I said, we were talking, and I said, did you know that UFCJ you were supposed to be? He says, no, I didn't know that. And I thought that makes sense because you don't know what the matchmakers or the promoters are doing. So a lot of times they're just moving things around. And I wouldn't want to be a matchmaker for the life of me because boy, that's a stress job. So when I found out that he didn't even know about it, I even felt, better about the whole ordeal. That would have been a whole
Jason, on a different note, I remember when I was on The Ultimate Fighter talking with Jorge Rivera, and I thought at one point he said, he had trained with you when he was early. Was there a lot of guys who kind of you kind of helped get started in the sport?
George is a great example of the machine. So he was with me for 3 years. And in that time, when he finally got antsy, and he came with no experience and he was too raw I didn't want to send him out. And then at some point he became antsy. He says, I got to fight. I said, all right. I said, I'm going to hook you up. So I hooked him up with Phyllis Lee, and he dragged his feet out of it. And I didn't know why at the time, but evidently somebody else was helping him out with I can do things for you. And they did. He did good. He did good for what he could. He has a manly spirit, and I was glad that he didn't get killed. It's funny. He sent me recently. I could even find that. I'd send it to you. I haven't talked to him in years, maybe 15. I don't even know.
Wow.
He sent me a picture the other day on my phone, and I looked at it. And I said, "Who is this?" Because I'm going to new flip phone. And he said, "George." So I called him up. I said, "Rivera." Yeah, okay. So we talked, and I couldn't believe he's living in Florida. And I don't think he's in the business anymore. I think he's just doing normal stuff. But I don't know. But he was a guy that, for all the time that he spent with me, I always wished that he would give me a shout out on UFC. But I think there was a ban on my name in the UFC because Ken helped with the blackballing of whatever that was. I knew that was from Ken. So.
I always liked Jorge. I knew he was a good guy. So
yeah, you cornered. Go ahead. I apologize.
No, that's okay. No, George, I was very proud of the guts that George had, and living through what he lived through, the broken jaw to his family to everything else, and he's still going.
You did you ever run into Nate Marquardt in Japan? I'm surprised you two never matched up.
I did. That's a funny. The first time I met him a few times, but the first time I met him, he saw me in the back room in one of the big halls, and he looks at me and he goes, "Do you ever get nervous?" And just as he asked me that, he goes, "Do you ever get nervous?" Because he was new. And I said, "Hold on one second." I called over to Yuki Kondo. I said, I don't know if I said it in Japanese or English. That's how long ago it was. But I asked him essentially, I said, "Yuki, do you get nervous before a fight?" He goes, "Yes." So I went, then I must get nervous too, because I really, you're doing it so long, you don't know. So but that was funny. Nate was really, really nice man, really talented. He was the one, he switched off Takase's heart. I don't know if you saw that fight. He fought a guy, Takase. Takase had this weird shot where he would whip his head in and then run in behind it. And Nate kneed him in the head and it stopped his heart. They had to resuscitate him in the ring.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. Nate was talented.
Wow. Your trilogy with Bas Rutten, the rumor was it culminated with you putting a hex on him. Is that true?
No. So this is one of those things. I'll say the story. I'm the guy who did it, and somebody will go, "That's a lie." I'm the guy who did it. You can trust me. The nature of the Wiccan spell is it has to be done for the benefit of somebody else. That's what it's done for. So what I did was Frank Shamrock's first fight in Japan, with no experience in fighting. He went over there for a month, trained for a month, and his first fight was Bas Rutten. So and this was all in it's supposed to be in good spirit. So I drew the picture, and in the signature on the picture, I took a drop of Frank's blood and a drop of my blood, and this picture was for Frank's safety, because I knew he knew nothing, and Bas was already an animal in the ring.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, what Frank drew or won that fight, I don't even remember, but he didn't.
He won. He won the fight against Bas, and it was incredible. Like, it was almost as if Bas never saw it coming. This guy Frank Shamrock, his first bout, is against Bas Rutten. It was just pretty incredible, heroic performance.
Yeah. Yeah. And the end result was he tried to call me out on, no, that's not true. You did it so that, your magic you would win the fight. I said, that's not why I did it. If you remember back when I gave it to you, it was before your fight with Frank. And I says, if you doubt me, there's 2 drops of blood in the signature. And he knew that because he had looked at it. He's like, yeah, there is. I says, you can look at those 2 drops and do the DNA and you'll see. Why would I put his blood in my signature? Yeah. But yeah, that's what that was for. And that was after the fact. That was long after the fact. That was years later when I actually told him about it. And I told him about it for a reason, because it was being obnoxious. He was being really obnoxious, as he could often be. And he's another guy. Love and respect him. But he didn't respect me. And the reason that I can say that now clearly is years later, I had a friend of a friend who's a promoter. And he showed me this magazine article. He said, check this out. And Bas was talking about the weirdest thing that ever happened to him. And up to that point, he and I were close, very, very good. And in the magazine, I guess he was in Europe at the time, and he said, the weirdest thing that ever happened to me was this guy did this thing talking about the pitcher. And the promoter said, I would love to make a match out of this. He says, can you make it happen? I says, I think I could, because Bas and I used to email all the time. And so I sent him an email, and it said, more or less words to the effect of, looks like you made enough publicity out of that picture. I said, how about giving me a rematch? And his answer was utter vitriol, condescending, disrespectful. And all I was trying to do was, the guy was going to pay him like 50 grand at the time for the fight. I wasn't going to get half that much. And I was just trying to set the fight. But his reaction was, what do you think? This and that. We all know what would happen. And I was like, really? Really? Don't mistake my kindness for weakness. Pancrase was Pancrase. I was in the first UFC, not you, you dickhead. I don't know what I said, but I wrote back to him like, I don't know what you think, but we didn't say anything after that. I didn't speak, and I figured, all right, I'm gonna leave it alone. So some people who were helping me said, you got to go to this place called Dog to try to do some things. And I went there to find out Bas Rutten's there. He's big there. Hey, great. Things are getting said. People are sending me pissed me off. Somebody was sending me emails or PMs and disgusting stuff. I'm opening this stuff and my kids are sitting there looking at it. And I'm like, really? You pieces of shit. And that's what I'm looking at. And then finally somebody says, hey, you got to check out Bas's narration of your fight with it. So I looked at it and more vitriol. And at some point in the fight where this is the third fight, where I gut wrench him, I take him down and I get on top of him and I cross face him. And I'm looking right at him like, this is your reality. And at some point he says, look how easy he takes me down. I wish I could do it all over again. When I heard him say that, I was like, that's it. And I went to Dog and I said, well, you said you wish you could do it all over again. Here it is. Let's do it. Whatever. And so he came up with, his answer to me was, oh, what is this, like some kind of, and he goes, so I see, you're a fuck up as a fighter. Now you're a fuck up as a man. I heard you've got a kid now. Now you're a fuck up as a father. And I'm like, whoa, really? Yeah. Check this out, motherfucker. I'll reach into your eyes, sodomize your eye sockets, and peel your head like a fucking tangerine. These are my words coming out of me. I don't want to be like this with people, but how dare you fucking talk about me and my kids? But at the time, what it is what it is. Now, here's the funny thing. I look on, this is not too long ago, near the election time. I look on a thing called Church Militant, and I see Bas Rutten on Church Militant. And he's like a converted soul, and I love it. And I hope it's real, because it was profound. It was moving. I don't want to go through that kind of feeling with people, because I really do. I respect what he did. I respect the fact that he lived through that Randleman fight. Holy shit.
Man, I've been around Bas, several times in the last several years, and he just seems like he's in a very good spot, and nothing but happy and nice to people. And he's definitely, whatever hatred he had, I feel like that's gone in that guy. So I feel like it's real.
I always loved him.
Yeah,
I always loved him, and when I saw that, I was moved. When I saw the thing, the way he spoke, and what he was talking about, It moved me, and I'm literally praying to God that I hope that's how he really is now.
He is.
Well, I know why some fighters, it has to be in their animus. They have to have a certain animus to be that way. And if you ever fought him, you'd be like, yeah, I get it. Because I'll give you another funny story about his ferocity. Guy Mezger is a fighter that I ultimately respect. And Guy Mezger, this is a true story, but Guy Mezger fought him in that fight, the story I told you about the knee bar. And at some point, Bas had hit him, and he hit him on, I believe, the spleen side, which is not easy to get a harsh reaction out of the spleen side. Liver is right away. Boom. Oh, fuck. Spleen is, you could see he hit him good, but he didn't, Guy was very manly. He didn't make it, he didn't really wince, but you could see it's like, oh, that sucked. After the fight, at some point, they wanted a rematch for Guy to fight Bas again. And Guy was very frank with me. He's like, he was in an accident, and he was in a car accident or something. He just is like, I'm not taking this fight. He was talking to me about it, and he said, alluding to it wasn't really the car accident, but it's a good excuse. And it was more or less, his reaction was, to be honest with you, I didn't appreciate those shots to the body. In other words, I don't feel like going through that again.
Wow.
Yeah, that's fucking Bas Rutten, man, is the real deal. It's the real deal. But the craziness of Bas Rutten, that's another story. But that's what some artists, to be that good, you have to have that edge, and I'd rather do without it.
You touched on it a couple of times. I was wondering if you were around. I mentioned John Lober, and Lober was Frank Shamrock's first MMA fight.
Yep.
And I think you've hinted that there was a difference between Pancrase and real MMA fighting. Do you think Frank learned that lesson that day? Were you around him there? Because he got beat up that first time in.
I talked to him before the fight, and I encouraged him not to do it. And I talked to him after the fight, and I could see the change. And that was definitely part of the transition of Frank had that. He didn't used to have the switch. It took him a long time to find it. But when he found it, that switch came on. The Tito fight being because I went the longest time before I watched that fight. Some of my students went to it, and they told me it was great. And I'm thinking in my head, it's great that he won. I'd never seen it until a few years ago. And I looked at it and I was like, really? In my head. Because knowing who he was and seeing what he did, it's otherworldly to me. Otherworldly. But he definitely, you could see when he formed that switch and when it came on, because he was never like that. Frank was never, he didn't have any animus about anything. And Ken used to yell at him for it because Frank was, he's like a martial artist. He just, we're just doing this. Oh, you tap me, I tap you. No, Ken would say. You're taking this thing home with you. You grab that guy's leg, it's coming off. Frank didn't want to be like that. Yeah, it's just the way it was.
Wow. We started this interview with you chasing down, traditional martial artists in order to challenge them to a fight. You're from the same neck of the woods as Frank Dukes, though, aren't you?
No, he's a California guy.
I thought he was you were in California. I figured if you were going to chase anybody down, it would have been him.
No, I didn't even believe he was real. And I didn't think any of that. Well, because the story that I heard was Frank Duke stole his life story from Paul Vizio. You know who that is? Paul Vizio was a bare knuckle fighter turned kickboxer, for lack of a better. But he was big in the 70s. Paul Vizio was outstanding. And the story I heard was that he stole his life story.
It's cool. We're wrapping up here, and we're in California again. Let me, and you were with the Gracies, and then obviously Steven Seagal and the Lions. Then, was Gokor around?
I have met Gokor. I trained with his. I did a little bit of rolling with his student. I can't remember his name.
Parisian?
Haru.
Oh, okay.
Haru. But yeah, I met Gokor a couple times, and just training. He did a little bit of rolling with Ken when Ken was wearing a cast. Nice guy. I liked watching his stuff. Cool. Those were in the days when Oleg Tektarov was around.
Okay, he was there with the Lions. And the other legend I want to ask you from California is Gene LeBell.
I never met Gene LeBell, and it's kind of funny that Frank Shamrock, who had no interest in martial arts, I guess at a certain point, met all of my heroes, and Gene LaBelle was one that I always wished I would meet. And the other irony was Steven Seagal is the whole reason I wound up doing this, and he's a coach for the UFC, and I can't even walk through the door.
That's horrible. Yeah, that's a horrible irony. And Frank's not in the Hall of Fame. Here's another one.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, I mean, I know we've taken a ton of your time, and I really appreciate this. This has been absolutely awesome. All these stories are exactly why we decided to do this. And I can't thank you enough for sharing this stuff, man. I mean, this is even eye-opening for myself, especially Japan times when I was there a lot. I just had different insight I never even knew about. So really appreciate that, man. Anything we can ever do for you, man, just please let us know, reach out to us.
Chris, I love you, and I think about you sometimes.
I appreciate that, man. And this is awesome. Thank you. It's been good catching up with you.
True martial artist right there.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are closing out the Jason DeLucia interview. A fan, like, guys, I think we're like fine wine, guys. We're getting better with age, and we're getting better with this podcast because this one was historic. What do you think, Mike?
All right, so Chris, in order not to disrupt the continuity of the interview, he was saying things, and we didn't ask him to open up on it because we didn't want to break the flow. So he had talked about a picture of two boys, young boys, I think, that possibly had been murdered, like a picture of them. Would you mind opening up on that? So because Miguel and I don't even know what that conversation even means.
And I think murdered was, a theory. From what I know, I never heard murdered. I've heard that, they passed away. And I don't know they never really opened up about that. So I don't know. I never really heard if it was murdered, if they died while training. I got the impression, though, it was like, just leave it alone, So, okay. They didn't really expand on it. I could have been a bit of a language barrier or just kind of letting go of that. But, yeah, I mean, they have interesting stuff going on there. So I don't really know what to make of that.
Okay, where was the picture located to where even yourself knew exactly what he was talking about?
Well, you go into in the gym, they just had a couple pictures up there, people who kind of Carl Gotch, people who founded, and just a couple of the pictures up and what are these guys? And they're just they're no longer here. So I'm like, okay. And then you kind of oh, they're dead. And then it was kind of okay, that's kind of it. They didn't say. They didn't say maybe. So I don't know exactly what happened there, but there's always some speculation. There's something that they didn't make it, and it sounded kind of nefarious, but you don't really know.
Yeah, we didn't want to cut Jason off. I wanted him to just keep the flow of what he was saying and stuff. But I told him, hey, we're gonna have to have you back for some of these because. He said that they were both, if I'm not mistaken, it sounded like he said they were both killed by the same guy in training. And is that feasible? Is that, well, yeah.
I mean, man, from what I saw there, and he's very old school guy, from what I saw there, training was rough for the new guys. You know what I mean? I mean, they knew how to train one way. And like I said, there was 3 of the young boys, what they called in there. And they were beating him bad. And then next time I show up, 2 would quit. I think they quit. Maybe they they quit. And then the third one became a tough fighter. So I think they just make you tough, or it's sink or swim there. It's not you're not going to have you come out there and embarrass them. If you represent that company, you're going to be a tough guy. And they're going to make you tough, or you're not going to make it. So maybe it went too far. Maybe something happened on some of those occasions. I have no idea. I wasn't really privy to that. I just know what he's talking about, those pictures, and I'm like, oh, I found this so interesting on many levels because, I learned a lot from him that I had no idea about there. I mean, a lot of things there are very hush-hush, and especially being a Gaijin, a foreigner, they're not telling me a lot of things, and me to try to pick up on little things every time I went happened, but he was there a lot more than I was. So I loved hearing what he had to say. It was fascinating.
What was kind of alarming to me, like you said, hey, the training sessions were tough. he didn't talk about those training sessions. He talked about Shamrock's training sessions being horrific. So, I mean, in comparison of the two, it doesn't sound like it was as bad.
I think that Shamrock, they mimicked the Japanese system. They had the young boy system. You come in, you have to try. I mean, I think that's where Shamrock and those guys got it from. I think they got it from the Japan hierarchy. I think that's where they learned it.
Yeah, and Josh Barnett too, also in that category.
I think Ken, and Ken sees, what Jason described as basically sadism from Suzuki. He said Funaki was a little bit more of a gentleman in the gym, but he said Suzuki was a real killer, and you could see Ken took to that right away. That's Ken's style because he copied that one. That's the one he liked,
Yep.
And then he took it to a next level. But yeah, I think there's definitely what Jason did is he let us under the hood of the Japanese, because the Japanese, it's like, oh, it's so respectful, and the fans, they all love the fighters, and everybody, and you can always tell stories about how it's safe in the streets at 2 a.m. and stuff like that. But there's very much an edge to being over there and being, maintaining a professional career over 50 fights and stuff that you got to be aware of. And I think Jason was the first one who really let us in on that, because he had a lot of good little examples, just things he noticed.
The cameraman.
The cameraman he said he swears it's the same cameraman with the bulb.
Big bulb.
And you can see, like, adjusting to the lights and stuff like that. Like, you can see how it could come into play in the first few minutes of the fight.
Yeah.
Is this the second or third guy that talked about being poisoned? Oleg, in our Oleg Viktorov interview, said he was poisoned. Did Eric Paulson? I think Paulson said he was too, right?
Yeah, I don't want to put words in somebody's mouth. I don't remember for sure, but I think it's a prevalent theme that people feel something's going on, like when they travel and traveling for the first time and traveling to hostile territory. When you go to Russia, it could happen. In the early days, the Americans, when they went to Brazil, you would think it could happen. In Japan, you kind of get the impression you're all taken care of and stuff. But then I wonder how many guys really, spend a couple of days on the toilet or whatever. You never know.
Man, I mean, you got to understand in a lot of these countries, I mean, honor, respect, and winning this is a big deal to them. I mean, they don't want to come lose to a foreign guy, and you see some of these fans and people who are in charge are fanatical, man. I mean, I wouldn't put it past anybody to, it sounds crazy, but I wouldn't put it past anybody to do, tamper with your water. Well, yeah, you seal it back up. I mean, it's very possible. I'm not saying it did happen. I'm saying I could definitely see that happening, and it's not crazy to think that's a reality. I mean, did it happen for sure? I got no idea, but is it possible? I think absolutely.
Well, Chris, here, we talk about national pride and things like that. You use the term gaijin. If you look up the term gaijin, it means animal face. Like, it's actually a derogatory term.
What? I learned that's what they call me.
I learned that from Bas Rutten. Also, Chris, you've talked about there's certain bars where they just hold up an X. They don't allow foreigners in there.
No, they said no gaijin. So, all right, I'm leaving. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So, like, imagine if you were to do that here under any circumstances or pretense.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, there'd be CNN would be there. There'd be a news media. They'd be canceled that bar. But I mean, like,
dude, you can't even post a dress code without some sort of ism being thrown your way.
But you know what, man? I mean,
they don't care.
I was there many times, and you go to certain places, and I look around, I'm like, well, who's causing the lion's share of the problems here? That gaijin. So I can see it. They're like, no, we're not letting this happen because you guys are causing problems. I get it. I didn't really get offended. I was like, well, fine, I'll go someplace else. But I was like, yeah,
I'll trouble elsewhere.
Yeah, I'll take my business elsewhere. I'll give my other people, my money. So whatever.
And
yeah, Jason's a guy that I don't think a lot of people have interviewed. I think we got a lot of great information and great insight. I think, more power to him. 50 fights in Japan. and he's still, we didn't even scratch the surface. We got to have him back, I think, if you'll
Yeah. All right. So this is how we tied it up. Ed Tyson, we do a MMA Artifacts show on the other channel, on Eclipse channel. Ed had his phone number. Jason only has a flip phone and an email, doesn't know anything about technology, nor does he care to have anything with technology. And he hasn't done an interview in about a decade. So Chris shot him a text, said he needed to talk to Chris to kind of verify it was him. And we went from there. Lytle, Ed Tyson, they're the ones that lined this up. And man, dude, this was a special conversation.
And like you said, UFC 1 veteran. I mean, going to try and track Steven Seagal down to fight him in the street. I mean, dude, this thing was amazing. I mean,
So there's a couple
old school. This is. I mean, it doesn't get any more old school than that. I mean, before UFC 1, this guy's out there doing it. Man, this guy had tons of great stories, and these are the stories I love. You talk about, it's got to be in the 90s, starting in the 90s, so when he had tons of them. So, man, that was an amazing interview. Thank you so much, Jason, for giving us that.
And then Crowbar, there's a couple trivia questions there. If you go to all the Wikipedias for the UFC 1, they always mention Jason DeLucia was the first fight. He was right before the championship bout, because I remember I watched it. But the thing is, it's an alternate bout, and they're just still trying to make their way. And they put it at the end. It's not true. He was like second to last fight.
First fight was Gerdou, was he not?
Yeah,
knocking teeth out.
So I think I've got a lead on Thule as well.
Let's see how he talks without teeth.
Yeah. Just one question.
How do you start an apple? Sorry.
My hat's off to Jason DeLucia, and also Fred Edish, who up until now was, the UFC 2 veteran that we had interviewed and stuff. At the end of the day, in 93, 94, there were a couple of traditional martial artist guys that were willing to step up and try this. And a lot, they get the reputation of those traditional martial arts. They wouldn't try this, and they banned it, they hated it, and stuff like that. There were a couple of guys like Fred and Jason DeLucia who actually pursued it and were there and had the stones to do it. So my hat's off to them.
MMA legend. Chris.
Hey, man, hopefully you guys enjoyed that as much as we did. Doesn't get more old school than that. Doesn't get more real than that. That's where the sport came from. Thank you, and keep watching. And, anybody you want us to get a hold of or talk to, please let us know. Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.